You've heard of emperors with harems, but what about empresses with secret boyfriends? Behind the silk screens of ancient China, royal ladies weren't just sipping tea, they were stirring up scandal. From pipa-playing heartthrobs to eyebrow-raising palace guards, these forbidden romances were juicier than a dumpling dipped in drama sauce. So grab your blanket, dim the lights, and prepare for a bedtime story that's 90% history, 10% gossip, and 100% sleepy. Oh, and before we dive into the royal romance, don't forget to like and subscribe, or I'll send a eunuch to read you poetry until you cave. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, whether it's your bed, your couch, or a secret chamber in the Forbidden City. Let's get scandalous, quietly, in the labyrinthine corridors of the Forbidden City, where every curtain had ears and every teacup had a backstory, lived a group of men who were neither quite servants nor quite spectators. They were eunuchs, the palace's most trusted, most gossipy, and most eyeliner-enhanced residents. Now, eunuchs weren't just there to refill tea and whisper, "Your Majesty, your jade comb is upside down." They were the Empress's confidants, her messengers, and occasionally, her secret crushes. Take eunuch Lin, for example. He was known for three things: his calligraphy so elegant it made poets weep, his ability to walk silently in embroidered slippers, his suspiciously poetic compliments to Empress Zhao, who ruled during the Ming Dynasty and had a fondness for riddles and rice crackers. Lin was charming, too charming. He once described the Empress's hair as a waterfall of midnight cascading over the cliffs of destiny. That's not normal palace talk. That's flirtation with a thesaurus. Empress Zhao, bored of court politics and allergic to her husband's beard oil, began inviting Lin to her chamber for scroll reviews. These reviews often involved tea, laughter, and one memorable incident where Lin accidentally spilled ink on a royal decree and turned it into a love poem. The other eunuchs noticed. They whispered. They raised their perfectly plucked brows. One even tried to sabotage Lin by switching his ink with soy sauce. But Lin was undeterred. He continued to serve the Empress with devotion, discretion, and a suspicious number of metaphors. Their relationship was never confirmed. After all, Lin was a eunuch, and palace rules were stricter than a Confucian grandmother. But the Empress's diary, discovered centuries later, contained a line that read, "Even the moon envies Lin's silence," which, frankly, sounds like someone was smitten. Eventually, Lin was promoted to Chief Scroll Organizer, a title that meant nothing and everything. He lived out his days in quiet luxury, surrounded by ink, silk, and memories of moonlit metaphors. In the Song Dynasty, where bureaucracy was thicker than kanji, and everyone had an opinion about rice tariffs, lived an empress named Liang Yanyu. She was sharp, serene, and secretly obsessed with stationery. Her calligraphy was so elegant, it once made a monk renounce minimalism. Now, Empress Liang had a problem: boredom. Her emperor was busy debating the price of bamboo, and her ministers were so dull, they made beige look exciting. Enter Scholar Wen, a man whose brain was so big it needed its own hat size. Wen was a tax reform specialist. His job? Make scrolls about grain levies sound sexy. His secret? He was madly in love with Empress Liang, and he had a plan. Instead of writing dry policy proposals, Wen began embedding love letters inside them. Not obviously, of course. He was subtle, sneaky, the James Bond of bureaucracy. One scroll read, In regions where rice yields exceed expectations, the surplus shall be stored in the imperial granary, lest it overflow like my heart when I see your majesty's silhouette against the moonlight. Another declared, the salt tax must be reduced, for the only thing saltier than the current levy is my longing for your gaze. The Empress noticed. She giggled. She blushed. She once spilled ink on her robe and blamed it on emotional turbulence, but she couldn't respond directly. Palace rules were stricter than a Confucian curfew, so she wrote back, in footnotes, her reply to the rice surplus scroll. Footnote 3. Consider alternative storage methods. Also, your metaphors are getting bold. Tone it down, Romeo. Their correspondence continued for months. Ministers were baffled by the sudden poetic flair in tax documents. One even tried to ban metaphors in policy writing, but was overruled by the Empress, who claimed creative taxation improves morale. Eventually, Scholar Wen was promoted to Chief Scroll Advisor, a position invented solely so he could deliver scrolls directly to the Empress. Their love remained hidden in margins, footnotes, and the occasional suspicious haiku. Years later, historians found their scrolls and mistook them for a failed attempt at romantic economic theory. One professor called it the passionate taxation movement. Another just called it weird. In the late Tang dynasty, when the empire was wobbling like a jelly dumpling on a hot plate, the palace was packed with concubines, courtiers, and one empress who had absolutely had it with everyone's nonsense. Her name was Empress May, and she was known for two things: her obsession with poetry, her ability to glare so intensely that birds stopped chirping. Now, Empress May had a rival concubine named Lady Lin, who was younger, prettier, and had a fan collection that could block out the sun. Lady Lin also had a poetry tutor named Zheng Fei, a man whose verses were so romantic they made cherry blossoms bloom out of season. Zheng Fei was supposed to teach Lady Lin how to write couplets for the emperor's birthday. Instead, he accidentally wrote a poem so beautiful, so haunting, so suspiciously personal, that Empress May intercepted it and thought, wait a minute, is this about me? The poem read, her gaze, a blade of moonlight, her silence, a storm in silk, her presence, the reason stars rehearse their sparkle. Lady Lin was furious. This is my poem, she cried. Empress May raised one eyebrow and said, then why does it describe my cheekbones? From that moment on, Empress May began attending Lady Lin's poetry lessons. Not officially, of course. She claimed she was inspecting educational standards, but she always sat very close to Zheng Fei and asked questions like, what rhymes with forbidden longing? Zheng Fei, caught between two powerful women and one very confusing syllabus, tried to stay neutral, but his poems kept getting more empressy. One scroll read, the lotus bows to her footsteps. The wind forgets its direction when she speaks. Lady Lin noticed. She began writing angry haikus. Empress May responded with sonnets. Zheng Fei just kept sweating. Eventually, the emperor got suspicious. He summoned Zheng Fei and asked, why do all your poems sound like love letters to my wife? Zheng Fei replied, I write what the muse commands. The emperor blinked. Your muse needs boundaries. Zheng Fei was reassigned to the Ministry of Boring Affairs, where he wrote poems about grain storage and water taxes. Empress May sighed. Lady Lin smirked, and the palace returned to its usual rhythm of passive-aggressive fan-waving. Every year, the Imperial Palace hosted the Lantern Festival, a night when the sky sparkled with floating lights. The courtiers wore their least itchy robes, and the Empress pretended to enjoy mingling with people who mispronounced auspicious. This particular year, Empress Shu, known for her grace and her ability to recite 300 poems without blinking, was feeling unusually restless. The emperor was busy judging a dumpling eating contest, and the ministers were arguing about lantern placement. Empress Shu wandered into the garden, where the lanterns bobbed like jellyfish, and the air smelled faintly of sesame oil and intrigue. That's when she saw him, Lan Yuan, the palace's official lantern designer. His job was to make sure every lantern was symmetrical, symbolic, and didn't catch fire. He was tall, quiet, and had the kind of hands that looked like they'd de-written poetry, but actually just tied a lot of knots. Lan Yuan was adjusting a dragon-shaped lantern when Empress Xu approached. "Your dragon's tail is crooked," she said. "It's a metaphor," he replied. "For what?" "For how I feel when you're near." She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling exploded in the distance. From that moment on, Empress Xu found excuses to visit the lantern workshop. She claimed she was inspecting fire safety protocols, but mostly she just watched Lan Yuan tie knots and occasionally dropped hints like, "Do you believe in destiny?" or just decorative lighting. Their flirtation was subtle. He once carved her name into a lantern frame. She once sent him a poem disguised as a fire hazard report. During the festival, they met under the largest lantern, a phoenix made of silk and sass. Lan Yuan handed her a small lantern shaped like a lotus. Inside was a note. "If I were a flame, I'd flicker only for you." She smiled, tucked the lantern into her sleeve, and whispered, "You're lucky I like metaphors." Their romance lasted exactly one festival season. After that, Lan Yuan was reassigned to the Ministry of Boring Geometry, and Empress Xu returned to pretending she liked dumplings. But every year, she requested a lotus lantern for her chamber and smiled when it flickered just slightly off-center. In the year 660-something or other, when the Tang dynasty was thriving like a well-watered bonsai tree, the imperial court was a swirling mix of politics, poetry, and people who wore more layers than a winter onion. At the center of this silk-swathed storm sat Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever rule China as emperor. She was brilliant, bold, and had a gaze that could curdle milk, or melt hearts, depending on the day. Now, Empress Wu had many advisors. Some were wise, some were sneaky, some were just there for the snacks. But one man stood out, not for his political prowess, but for his ability to play the pipa, a lute-like instrument that sounds like a harp and looks like a pancake with a neck. His name? Dong Baoluo. His talent? Strumming strings and stirring souls. His secret? He was madly, melodiously in love with the Empress. Dong wasn't born noble. He was the son of a general and a dumpling vendor, which meant he could recite battle strategies while folding pork buns. He entered the palace as a court musician, but his pipa playing was so enchanting that even the stone lions outside the palace gates were rumored to sway slightly when he performed. One evening, Empress Wu summoned Dong to her private chamber, not for politics, but for a performance. He played a tune called Moonlight Over Lotus Pond. While thinking about someone who definitely isn't to you, but might be you, it was subtle, it was romantic, it was suspiciously specific. Wu Zetian listened, sipped her chrysanthemum tea, and raised one eyebrow, a gesture that in Tang Dynasty, body language meant, I'm intrigued, but also mildly judging you. From that night on, Dong Bao Luo became her favorite musician. He played during banquets, during strategy meetings, and once, during a thunderstorm, just to see if he could out-romance the weather. Their relationship was never officially recorded, but palace gossip was louder than a pipa solo in a marble hallway. Some said they exchanged love poems hidden in scrolls. Others claimed Dong once disguised himself as a eunuch just to sneak into her chamber. One bold rumor suggested they played chess together, but always ended in a draw, because love, like chess, is complicated and full of pawns. Their affair lasted years, surviving political purges, musical rivalries, and one unfortunate incident involving a jealous flute player named Li Pingping. Dong Baoluo eventually disappeared from the records, which in historical terms means either he retired peacefully or was turned into a cautionary tale for future musicians. As for Empress Wu, she continued to rule with brilliance, ruthlessness, and perhaps a lingering fondness for pipa melodies played under moonlight. Empress Wu Zetian may have had a secret romance with a pipa-playing heartthrob. Dong Baoluo's music was so enchanting, it may have strummed the strings of power. Palace gossip was the ancient version of TikTok, fast, dramatic, and occasionally exaggerated. In the Ming Dynasty, where robes were embroidered with dragons, and everyone had strong opinions about tea temperature, the palace was guarded by men who looked like they'd have walked straight out of a heroic scroll painting. Among them was one guard who didn't just protect the empress, he bewitched her. His name was Jin Wei, and his eyebrows were legendary. Not metaphorically, literally, they were golden, not dyed, not painted, just naturally sun-kissed in a way that made poets weep and pigeons pause mid-flight. Empress Renhua, known for her stoicism and her ability to solve riddles faster than most scholars could blink, first noticed Jin Wei during a ceremonial parade. While other guards looked like stern statues, Jin Wei looked like a statue that had just read a romantic haiku. She asked her maid, "Who is that guard with the celestial brow arches?" The maid replied, "That's Jin Wei. He once stared down a tiger." The tiger apologized. Intrigued, Empress Renhua began taking strolls near the guard posts, not because she feared for her safety. She feared nothing except poorly steeped tea, but because she wanted to observe Jin Wei in his natural habitat, standing still and looking majestic. One day, she dropped her silk handkerchief. Jin Wei picked it up and said, "Your Majesty, your cloud has fallen." She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. From then on, Jin Wei was assigned to her personal escort detail. He walked 3 steps behind her, never spoke unless spoken to, and once caught a falling scroll with such grace that the Empress wrote a poem about it titled "Elegance in Elbow Reflex." Their interactions were brief, but charged. He once complimented her jade bracelet. She once asked if his eyebrows were insured. Rumors swirled. Ministers whispered. One eunuch tried to sketch Jin Wei's face, but fainted from eyebrow-induced awe. Eventually, Empress Renhua gifted Jin Wei a comb made of sandalwood. It was a subtle gesture, but in palace romance language, it meant, "I see you. I respect your follicles." Their relationship remained unspoken, unconfirmed, and entirely eyebrow-based. Jin Wei continued guarding. Empress Renhua continued ruling. And somewhere in the palace archives, a scroll remains titled "Security Protocols and unexpected feelings. In the Qing dynasty, where etiquette was stricter than a scroll librarian during inventory season, tea wasn't just a beverage, it was a lifestyle, a philosophy, and occasionally a flirtation device. Empress Dowager Lin Fei, known for her impeccable taste and her ability to detect a poorly brewed cup from 3 rooms away, had one indulgence: tea ceremonies. Not the rushed kind with slurping and sighing, but the slow, poetic kind where every leaf was a metaphor and every sip was a spiritual awakening. Enter Master Shen, the imperial tea master. He was quiet, graceful, and had the kind of hands that made porcelain tremble with anticipation. His tea was legendary. His eyebrows were symmetrical. His presence was calming, like a nap wrapped in steam. One day, Empress Lin Fei requested a private tea ceremony, not because she was thirsty, but because she'd heard rumors that Master Shen could brew a cup so emotionally complex it made one minister cry about his childhood. Master Shen arrived with his tea set, his scroll of poetic pairings, and a mysterious smile. He poured the first cup and said, "This blend is called Whispers of Winter Regret." She sipped. It tasted like longing and slightly oversteeped jasmine. She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. From that moment on, Empress Lin Fei requested daily tea sessions. She claimed it helped her meditate on imperial matters. But mostly, she just wanted to hear Master Shen describe tea like it was a love letter. One day, he handed her a cup and said, "This one is moonlight over forgotten promises." She replied, "You're dangerously poetic for someone who works with leaves." Their flirtation was subtle. He once folded a napkin into a lotus and placed it beside her cup. She once wrote a haiku about steam and tucked it under his teapot. The palace staff noticed. One eunuch tried to brew tea with extra romance, but accidentally steeped his sleeve. Eventually, Master Shen gifted her a rare tea blend called Silent Affection. Inside the pouch was a note: "If I were a leaf, I'd fall into your cup and never wish to be removed." She smiled, sipped, and said, "You're lucky I don't mind metaphors in my mouth." Their romance remained unspoken, steeped in ceremony, and sealed in porcelain. Master Shen was later promoted to Minister of Aromatic Affairs, a title that meant nothing but smelled amazing. In the Han Dynasty, where diplomacy was a delicate dance of scrolls, silks, and snacks, the palace was often the site of tense negotiations. Treaties were signed, alliances were forged, and occasionally, someone spilled ink on a map and started a war over a smudge. Empress Lianhua, known for her sharp wit and her ability to wear 12 layers of silk without sweating, was the empire's secret weapon in diplomacy. While the emperor debated grain tariffs, she handled the real business, quietly, elegantly, and sometimes horizontally. One winter, a delegation from the kingdom of Shu arrived. They brought gifts: jade combs, rare spices, and one ambassador Rui, a man whose voice was smoother than fermented plum wine and whose cheekbones could slice tofu. The empress met him during a banquet. He complimented her fan technique. She complimented his metaphor usage. They locked eyes over a bowl of steamed lotus root, and history began to wobble. Negotiations began the next day. The emperor fell asleep during the first session. Empress Lianhua took over. She invited Ambassador Rui to her private chamber, not for scandal, but for strategy. The chamber was warm, the pillows were plentiful, and the scrolls were conveniently within arm's reach. They discussed trade routes, border disputes, and the emotional symbolism of dumplings. Rui proposed a silk for spice exchange. Lianhua countered with a metaphor about rivers and longing. At one point, she said, "Your proposal is strong, but your punctuation is reckless." He replied, "I negotiate with passion, not commas." By the third night, the treaty was nearly complete. They lay on opposite ends of the bed, surrounded by scrolls, maps, and one confused eunuch holding a lantern. The final clause was written in calligraphy so elegant it made a minister cry. The treaty was signed. The emperor was impressed. The kingdom of Shu was pleased. And Empress Lianhua? She kept the pillow where Rui had rested his head and claimed it was strategically comfortable. Their romance was never confirmed. But the treaty was unusually poetic. One clause read, "Let the rivers of Shu and Han flow together, like dreams shared beneath moonlight," which, frankly, sounds like someone got diplomatic. In the Sui dynasty, where scrolls were stacked higher than ambition, and palace corridors twisted like a confused noodle, lived an empress named Zhao Yuelan. She was clever, composed, and had a secret talent for solving riddles faster than a minister could misplace his dignity. Her days were filled with ceremonies, her nights with sighs, and her afternoons with scroll reviews, so dry they made rice crackers seem juicy. But behind the velvet curtains of her chamber, something, or someone, was stirring. Enter Li Shen, a palace scribe with a knack for disappearing and reappearing in places he absolutely shouldn't be. He was quiet, quick, and had the kind of face that looked like it had read too many romantic poems and taken them personally. Li Shen's job was to organize scrolls. His hobby? Sneaking into the Empress's chamber through the scroll closet, a narrow passageway designed for parchment. Not passion. It began innocently. He delivered a scroll. She complimented his handwriting. He replied, "Your Majesty, your words deserve better ink." She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. Soon, he was appearing more often. Not officially, he was checking for scroll pests. But somehow, he always arrived when the Empress was alone, bored, and in the mood for metaphorical banter. One day, she found a note tucked inside a scroll about irrigation policy. It read, "If I were a river, I'd flood your silence with longing." She smiled, wrote back on the margins, "If I were a dam, I'd pretend not to notice." Their secret correspondence continued, hidden in scrolls, tucked in footnotes, and once disguised as a diagram of rice field drainage. Ministers were baffled by the sudden poetic flair in agricultural reports. One eunuch tried to decode the metaphors and accidentally proposed to a goose. Li Shen became known as the Whispering Scribe. He was never caught, never questioned, and always smelled faintly of ink and rebellion. Empress Zhao Yuelan kept a scroll labeled "Emergency Irrigation Plans," which was actually a collection of their love notes. Eventually, Li Shen vanished. Some say he was reassigned. Others say he escaped through the scroll closet one last time, leaving behind a final note. "If I were a scroll, I'd curl around your memory." The Empress read it, sighed, and ordered a new scroll cabinet, one with a lock. In the twilight years of the Tang dynasty, when the empire was still glittering but slightly exhausted, the palace hosted an annual event known as the Spring Elegance Showcase. It was a night of music, poetry, and performances so refined they made silk blush. Empress Jiayi, known for her poise and her ability to critique choreography, with surgical precision, was the guest of honor. She had seen every fan dance in the empire, twirls, flicks, dramatic pauses, but nothing truly impressed her anymore, until Chen Lian, a dancer with a mysterious past, and a fan technique so hypnotic it once made a minister walk into a koi pond. Chen Lian wasn't just a dancer, he was a fan whisperer. His movements were fluid, his timing impeccable, and his fans, two crimson silk masterpieces, seemed to have their own personalities. He twirled, he leapt, he paused dramatically while staring into the middle distance like he'd just remembered a tragic dumpling. Empress Jiai watched from her jade throne, sipping plum wine and pretending not to be intrigued. But when Chen Lian performed his signature move, the phoenix spiral of emotional turbulence, she leaned forward and whispered, "Who choreographed this scandal?" After the performance, she summoned him, not for punishment, for questions. "Your dance," she said, "was suspiciously metaphorical." He replied, "Your Majesty, I merely express what cannot be spoken." She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. From that night on, Chen Lian was invited to perform privately. He claimed it was for artistic feedback. She claimed it was for imperial morale. Their sessions involved fans, music, and one memorable incident where a eunuch walked in and fainted from sheer dramatic tension. Rumors spread. Ministers speculated. One tried to ban fan dancing altogether, but was overruled by the Empress, who declared art must be free, especially when it's this emotionally confusing. Eventually, Chen Lian gifted her a fan, crimson silk, embroidered with a phoenix, and a poem that read, "If I were wind, I'd dance only for you." She smiled, twirled the fan, and said, "You're lucky I like poetic breezes." Their romance remained unconfirmed, but the Empress's chambers were always slightly foggy, and her fan collection mysteriously doubled. Chen Lian was later promoted to Minister of Expressive Movement, a role invented solely to justify his presence. In the Yuan dynasty, where matchmaking was considered both an art and a mildly dangerous sport, the palace employed a woman named Madame Bao, whose job was to pair nobles with suitable spouses using astrology tea leaves and a suspicious amount of guesswork. Empress Xiao Yun, known for her elegance and her ability to spot a fake compliment from 3 provinces away, had grown tired of palace drama. She requested a match, not for herself, of course, but for her cousin, Lady May, who had recently declared she'd rather marry a scroll than another boring noble. Madame Bao got to work. She consulted the stars, the wind, and a dumpling that landed upright. Her conclusion? The perfect match was a man named Brother An, a monk from the Temple of Serene Regret. Now, monks weren't usually part of the dating pool. They were celibate, serene, and mostly interested in incense. But Brother An was different. He had a voice like velvet tofu, and a gaze that made even statues reconsider their life choices. When he arrived at the palace to bless the matchmaking ceremony, Empress Xiaoyun saw him and whispered, "That monk has cheekbones sharp enough to slice imperial protocol." Lady May was unimpressed. "He looks like he's about to lecture me on inner peace." Empress Xiaoyun replied, "Inner peace is suddenly very attractive." Brother An spoke little, bowed often, and accidentally recited a poem that made the Empress blush. It wasn't meant to be romantic. It was about bamboo, but somehow it felt personal. Madame Bao realized her mistake. She matched the Empress's cousin with a monk who was now the object of the Empress's increasingly poetic sighs. She tried to fix it by introducing a backup suitor named Lord Pudding, but he fainted during introductions. Meanwhile, Brother Anne continued to bless things, scrolls, dumplings, and once, the Empress's fan. She asked him, "Do you believe in destiny?" He replied, "Only when it's inconvenient." Their interactions were brief, respectful, and charged with the kind of tension usually reserved for dramatic opera finales. Eventually, Brother Anne returned to his temple, leaving behind a sandalwood prayer bead and a note that read, "May your heart be as still as mine pretends to be." Empress Xiaoyun kept the bead in her sleeve and told no one. Lady May married a poet. Madame Bao retired and opened a matchmaking school for cats in the early Ming dynasty, where gardens were designed with more precision than military campaigns, and peonies were considered emotionally supportive. The imperial palace had one hidden treasure, the moonlit garden of whispering blossoms. It was a place of serenity, silence, and suspiciously well-trimmed hedges. Only a few were allowed inside, mostly gardeners, poets, and one empress who had a fondness for floral metaphors. Her name was Empress Wengxiu, known for her grace, her love of peonies, and her ability to quote ancient poetry while walking backwards. She often visited the garden alone, claiming she needed botanical clarity. But one evening, she wasn't alone. Zhao Min, the palace's junior poet and part-time flower arranger, had been assigned to enhance the emotional symmetry of the garden. He was quiet, thoughtful, and had a habit of composing verses about petals and heartbreak. Their first meeting was accidental. Empress Wengxiu was admiring a peony when Zhao Min emerged from behind a bush, holding a scroll and sneezing dramatically. She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. "Your Majesty," he stammered, "I was just rhyming near the roses." She replied, "Then rhyme carefully. These roses are sensitive." From that moment on, their paths crossed often. She'd stroll. He'd prune. She'd quote poetry. He'd respond with a haiku. One day, he handed her a bouquet with a note tucked inside. "If I were a petal, I'd fall at your feet and hope for sunlight." She smiled, placed the bouquet in her sleeve, and whispered, "You're lucky I like sentimental flora." Their rendezvous became routine. They met at dusk, exchanged verses, and once shared a moment so romantic it made a butterfly faint. But palace rules were strict, and one poorly timed sneeze nearly ruined everything. During a particularly poetic evening, Zhao Min sneezed so loudly it startled a nearby minister who was meditating under a plum tree. The minister reported suspicious floral activity, and an investigation began. Empress Wengxiu denied everything. Zhao Min was reassigned to the Department of Emotionally Neutral Landscaping, where he trimmed hedges with quiet longing, but the garden remained their secret haven. And every spring, the peonies bloomed with suspicious enthusiasm. In the Qing dynasty, where secrets were stored in scrolls and gossip traveled faster than a startled goose, the palace was a maze of whispers, silk, and snacks. And at the center of it all was Empress Qiaolian, a woman known for her elegance, her strategic silences, and her habit of writing in her diary every single night, usually after a bowl of sesame dumplings. Her diary was legendary, not because anyone had read it, they hadn't, but because it was bound in embroidered silk, locked with a jade clasp, and kept in a drawer labeled "Definitely Not Scandal." Naturally, everyone wanted to read it. Enter Eunuch Han, a palace attendant with a talent for organizing things and a nose for drama. One night, while delivering a midnight snack to the Empress's chamber, sesame dumplings, extra sleepy, he accidentally knocked over the diary drawer. The jade clasp popped open. The diary fell out. The dumplings rolled under the bed. Han stared at the diary. The diary stared back. He blinked. It didn't. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. He picked it up. Just one peek, he thought. For inventory purposes, for historical accuracy, for curiosity. The first entry read, "Today, Minister Zhao misquoted Confucius. I pretended not to notice. I am a benevolent goddess." The second entry, "I saw the tea master again. He brewed a blend called Whispers of Longing. I pretended it was too bitter. It wasn't." Han gasped. He flipped pages. The Empress had written about everyone. Ministers, concubines, even the imperial cat, who she suspected was plotting something. But most scandalous of all were the entries about Scholar Liu, a man who had recently been promoted to Advisor of Philosophical Ambiguity. Liu quoted Laozi today. "I pretended to be confused. I wasn't." His metaphors are dangerous. Han, now fully invested, began annotating the diary with footnotes. He added commentary, analysis, and once, a doodle of the Empress blushing. He didn't mean to become a literary critic. It just happened. Eventually, Empress Qiaolian discovered the annotations. She summoned Han. He bowed, apologized, and offered her a dumpling. She took it, read his notes, and said, "Your punctuation is surprisingly insightful." Instead of punishment, she promoted him to keeper of emotional records, a role that involved organizing scrolls, snacks, and feelings. The diary was reclassified as Imperial Reflections, and Han was instructed to continue annotating, quietly, respectfully, and with fewer doodles. In the twilight years of the Song dynasty, where secrets were traded like dumplings and walls were built not just for defense but for dramatic effect, the imperial palace had one peculiar feature: the Whispering Wall. It wasn't officially named that. Technically, it was just a decorative divider between the Empress S chamber and the Hall of Mildly Important Scrolls. But over time, people noticed something strange. If you stood close enough, the wall whispered. Empress Lu Ying, known for her intelligence, her collection of jade bookmarks, and her ability to detect lies faster than a squirrel detects peanuts, was the first to suspect the wall was more than just stone. And silence. She'd sit in her chamber, sipping chrysanthemum tea, and hear faint murmurs, not ghostly moans, more like passive-aggressive commentary. Minister Zhao's robe is wrinkled again. The Empress's fan matches her mood, icy. Someone's dumpling stash is missing. Again. Naturally, she investigated. She tapped the wall. She whispered to it. She even tried bribing it with incense. Eventually, she discovered the truth. The wall wasn't magical. It was porous, and the acoustics allowed sound from the adjacent room to travel in strange, gossipy ways. But here's where it gets scandalous. One evening, Empress Lu Ying heard a voice she didn't recognize. Deep, poetic, and suspiciously flirtatious. It belonged to calligrapher Ren, a man who worked in the Hall of Mildly Important Scrolls and had a habit of reciting romantic verses while practicing his brushstrokes. Her gaze is ink, her silence, parchment, her presence, the poem I dare not write. The Empress blinked. The wall whispered again. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed, Intrigued, she began spending more time near the wall. She rearranged her furniture. She pretended to meditate, but really, she was listening to Ren's poetic monologues, which grew increasingly specific. If she knew I watched her from behind this wall of whispers, would she smile or summon guards? Eventually, Empress Lu Ying wrote a poem of her own and had it accidentally delivered to the Hall of Mildly Important Scrolls. It read, "If your ink spills for me, let it stain boldly." Ren received it, blushed, and began reciting even more dramatic verses. Their romance remained entirely wall-based. They never met. They never spoke face to face, but their hearts echoed through stone and syllables. Years later, the wall was renovated. The whispers stopped, but one brick remained untouched, engraved with a poem, "Love, like ink, seeps through silence." In the final years of the Tang dynasty, when fashion was fierce and jewelry was basically a political statement, the palace was a glittering maze of silk, secrets, and accessories that could start wars or romances. Empress Yanzhen, known for her impeccable taste and her ability to match jade with mood swings, had a bracelet that everyone envied. It was carved from a single piece of pale green jade, shaped like a dragon curling around a cloud. It was said to bring wisdom, luck, and, according to one overly poetic eunuch, the ability to make ministers cry with a glance. But the bracelet wasn't just beautiful. It was sentimental. It had been gifted to her by Lu Feng, the imperial jeweler. He was quiet, precise, and had the kind of hands that made gemstones feel understood. He'd been summoned to repair a broken clasp, but instead, he repaired something else entirely: the Empress's boredom. Their first meeting was brief. She handed him the bracelet. He examined it and said, "This jade has seen longing." She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. From then on, Empress Yanzhen requested his services often, not because her jewelry was falling apart. It wasn't ET, but because Lu Feng had a way of speaking that made even mineral metaphors sound romantic. One day, he returned the bracelet with a tiny engraving on the inside. "If I were jade, I'd wish to be worn by you." She smiled, wore the bracelet daily, and claimed it balanced her imperial energy. Ministers noticed. One tried to compliment the bracelet and was met with a glare so icy it could freeze tea. Their interactions were subtle. He once adjusted her necklace and whispered, "Your Majesty, even pearls envy your poise." She once handed him a broken hairpin and said, "Fix it slowly. I enjoy your presence more than punctuality." Rumors swirled. One concubine claimed the bracelet glowed when Lu Feng entered the room. Another said the Empress had started naming her jewelry after emotions. The Emperor remained oblivious. He was busy debating the ethics of decorative tassels. Eventually, Lu Feng was reassigned to the Ministry of Ornamental Integrity, a department that didn't exist until the Empress insisted it should. The bracelet remained on her wrist, and every time she touched it, she smiled like someone remembering a metaphor. In the late Han Dynasty, where emperors were revered, feared, and occasionally ignored by their own pets, palace, life revolved around one man, Emperor Gaoji, a ruler known for his love of scrolls, snacks, and his complete inability to notice romantic tension. Even when it danced past him, wearing silk and sighing dramatically, his wife, Empress Huayan, was graceful, intelligent, and had a habit of writing poetry that made ministers weep and eunuchs suspicious. She spent her days attending court, her evenings composing verses, and her nights wondering how her husband could miss the fact that she was clearly in love with someone else. That someone? Poet in residence Lin Zhou, a man whose metaphors were so emotionally charged they once made a dumpling burst into tears. Lin Zhou was assigned to help the Empress compile a collection of imperial verses. Their sessions were filled with rhymes, longing, and one memorable moment when he described her voice as the echo of moonlight on a lake that knows too much. She blushed. He blushed. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. Meanwhile, Emperor Gaoji remained blissfully unaware. He once walked in on Lin Zhou, handing the Empress a scroll and said, "Ah, excellent. More paperwork." He then tripped over a cushion and asked if anyone had seen his lucky fan. The signs were everywhere. The Empress's lipstick mysteriously appeared on Lin Zhou's sleeve. Her poems began referencing forbidden gardens and unspoken winds. Lin Zhou started wearing robes that matched her hairpins. One eunuch, Bao, tried to intervene. He coughed loudly every time Lin Zhou entered the room. He rearranged scrolls to block romantic metaphors. He even wrote a haiku titled, "Please stop this before I get fired." But the emperor didn't notice. He was busy debating the merits of plum sauce versus soy sauce in ceremonial dumplings. Eventually, Lin Zhou was reassigned to the Department of Emotionally Vague Literature, and Empress Huaiyan returned to writing poems about solitude and the tragic beauty of missed glances. The emperor read one and said, "Very dramatic. Is this about the weather?" In the Northern Wei dynasty, where riddles were considered a noble pastime and metaphors were treated like currency, the palace was a playground of puzzles, poetry, and people pretending to understand things they absolutely didn't. Empress Zhenhua, known for her intellect and her ability to solve riddles faster than a squirrel finds buried dumplings, hosted a weekly event called the Evening of Enigmas. Ministers dreaded it, eunuchs feared it, but one man thrived, Riddle Master Shu, a scholar with a mysterious past and a vocabulary so elaborate it once caused a scroll to spontaneously combust. Shu wasn't just clever, he was confusing. His riddles were layered, poetic, and occasionally involved vegetables. One famous example, "I am green, I am bitter, I am sliced when love is lost. What am I?" Answer, a metaphor for heartbreak disguised as a cucumber. Empress Zhenhua was intrigued. She invited Shu to her chamber for a private riddle duel. Not for romance, of course, just for intellectual stimulation. But when he posed the riddle, what blooms in silence, hides in scrolls, and trembles when touched by moonlight? She blinked. He blinked. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. She answered, "A secret." He replied, "Correct. Specifically, mine." From that moment on, their riddles became flirtatious. She asked, "What is soft, sharp, and worn near the heart?" He answered, "Your words." They never spoke plainly. Everything was wrapped in metaphor, cloaked in confusion, and occasionally misinterpreted by nearby staff. One eunuch, Bao, overheard a riddle and thought it was a marriage proposal to a decorative vase. He accepted. The vase declined. Their romance unfolded through riddles, hidden in scrolls, whispered during banquets, and once carved into a dumpling. Ministers grew suspicious. One tried to ban riddles, claiming they were emotionally destabilizing. He was reassigned to the Department of Literal Interpretations. Eventually, Shu left the palace, leaving behind a final riddle. What is never spoken, always felt, and lingers longer than logic? Empress Zhenhua smiled and whispered, You, in the bustling heart of the Tang dynasty, where street markets buzzed louder than palace gossip, and dumplings were considered both food and emotional support. One empress decided she needed a break from politics, from protocol, and from people who bowed too slowly. Empress Ru Ying, known for her sharp mind and her ability to detect insincerity faster than a dumpling disappears at midnight, had grown weary of palace life. So, naturally, she did what any rational empress would do. She disguised herself as a dumpling vendor and snuck out into the city. Her disguise was flawless. She wore a plain robe, tied her hair in a messy bun, and carried a bamboo steamer like she'd been born to serve snacks. No one suspected a thing, except one pigeon, who stared at her suspiciously for 3 hours. At the market, she met Chen Bo, a street performer who juggled teacups and recited poetry while balancing on one foot. He was charming, slightly clumsy, and had the kind of smile that made people forget they were being mildly scammed. Their first interaction was chaotic. She offered him a dumpling. He dropped a teacup. The pigeon squawked. She said, You owe me a poem for that dumpling? He replied, Only if it's pork-filled inspiration. From then on, Empress Ru Ying returned to the market daily. She claimed she was testing dumpling distribution logistics. But really, she just wanted to hear Chen Bo rhyme about soy sauce and longing. One day, he handed her a folded napkin with a poem. If you were a dumpling, I'd never let you steam alone. She laughed, tucked it into her sleeve, and whispered, You're lucky I enjoy emotional snacks. Their romance bloomed between bamboo steamers and street performances. He never knew she was an empress. She never told him. But one day, a minister spotted her and fainted into a basket of scallion buns. The disguise was over. Chen Bo was summoned to the palace, where he bowed awkwardly and said, Your Majesty, I didn't know dumplings could be royal. She smiled and replied, They can, especially when they're served with poetry. Chen Bo was appointed palace entertainer of culinary verse, a position invented solely to justify his presence. The pigeon was promoted to suspicious bird of honor. In the waning days of the Ming dynasty, when emotions were folded like dumplings and farewells were served with soy sauce, the palace kitchens were a place of quiet drama. Steam rose, secrets simmered, and one empress found herself staring into a bowl of flour with more feelings than ingredients. Empress Mingzhao, known for her culinary curiosity and her ability to detect emotional tension in soup, had recently ended a secret romance with Chef Bao, the imperial cook whose dumplings were so good they once caused a minister to weep mid-bite. Their love had been quiet, steamy, and wrapped in dough. He'd send her dumplings with poetic fillings, lotus paste shaped like hearts, scallion twists that spelled longing. She'd respond with compliments disguised as recipe revisions. But palace politics were heating up, and their romance was deemed too flavorful for imperial standards. Chef Bao was reassigned to the Department of Bland Nutrition, and Empress Mingzhao was told to focus on ruling, not roasting. Before he left, Chef Bao sent her one final recipe scroll. It was labeled Dumplings of Reflection. She opened it, expecting instructions. What she found was a goodbye note, disguised as culinary advice. Fold the dough gently, as you once folded my name into your silence, fill with longing, seasoned with restraint. Steam until the memories rise. Serve with a side of what could have been. She read it, sighed, and tucked the scroll into her sleeve. That night, she made the dumplings herself. They tasted like nostalgia, with a hint of emotional ginger. No one knew, no one asked. But the Empress's dumpling nights became a quiet tradition. Once a month, she'd cook alone, eat slowly, and remember a love that had been folded, sealed, and steamed into history. In the final flicker of the Qing dynasty, when the palace was quieter than usual, and the moon seemed to linger a little longer over the rooftops, a legend began to swirl among the servants, whispered like lullabies and folded into laundry. It was said that Empress Yuelan, known for her grace and her habit of walking barefoot when no one was looking, once received a pair of red silk slippers from a mysterious admirer. No one knew who sent them. No note, no name, just the slippers, embroidered with tiny phoenixes and lined with moonlight-colored satin. She wore them only once. That night, she wandered into the palace courtyard, where the moon hung low and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and secrets. There, waiting beneath the plum tree, was Jin, a former court dancer turned gardener, whose movements were so fluid they made leaves reconsider their fall schedule. He bowed. She nodded. A dumpling rolled by, unnoticed. Without a word, they began to dance. No music, no audience, just the soft shuffle of red slippers on stone and the occasional sigh from the wind. It was a dance of memory, of longing, of everything they hadn't said during years of stolen glances and shared silences. The moon watched. The plum tree bloomed out of season. A pigeon blinked twice and flew away, emotionally overwhelmed. When the dance ended, Empress Yuelan placed the slippers beneath the tree and whispered, "Let them stay where love was real." Jin smiled, bowed once more, and vanished into the shadows. Whether into the garden or into legend, no one could say. The slippers remained. For years, servants claimed they glowed under moonlight. Ministers avoided the courtyard, citing emotional slipper interference. And the Empress? She never danced again, but she often stared at the moon like it owed her a memory. And so ends our saga of silken secrets, poetic dumplings, and empresses who loved boldly behind brocade screens. From pipa players to poetic gardeners, their stories twirled through history like sleepy lanterns in the wind. If you've made it this far, your eyelids deserve a standing ovation. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or I'll send a dumpling with feelings to your doorstep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, whether it's your bed, your couch, or a secret chamber behind a scroll cabinet. Until next time, may your dreams be embroidered with moonlight and mildly scandalous metaphors. Good night.